I've never been one for grand entrances, but that night, standing just outside the glowing gymnasium where my granddaughter Pamela's prom was being held, I hesitated for longer than I should have. My fingers fidgeted with the corsage. I had brought her white orchids, her favorite. It had taken me 3 stops and nearly an hour of phone calls to find a florist who still had them in stock. She'd mentioned them once, months ago, in passing. I'd remembered. I always remembered. The music throbbed through the walls, a pulsing rhythm of youth and excitement. Laughter and the clicking of heels echoed beyond the double doors. Parents and students mingled at the photo booth near the entrance. Everyone looked radiant. And yet, despite the happy chaos, I had a familiar tightness in my chest. I adjusted my scarf and stepped inside. I saw Pamela almost immediately. She was standing near the punch table, laughing with her friends in a sleek navy blue dress, her brown curls cascading over her shoulders like they always had when she was little and I'd braided them for school. My heart swelled. But then I saw Betty. Betty, my daughter-in-law. Pamela's mother by marriage, not blood. She was standing just behind her, wearing a slinky red dress far too formal for a high school dance and an expression that turned to ice the second she saw me. "Lily," she said, as though tasting something bitter. "You came." I smiled gently. "Of course I did. It's Pamela's prom." Betty let out a dry, insincere laugh. "Yes, well, no one told me you were invited." "I didn't need an invitation," I said softly. "I just wanted to give her this." I held up the corsage. She didn't even look at it. Instead, she turned her head theatrically to scan the room. "You didn't really dress for the occasion," she said loudly, attracting a few glances from nearby parents. "I mean, I suppose that's what happens when you live on sentiment instead of style." I was wearing a lavender dress that I'd bought for my late husband's retirement party 15 years ago. Yes, it was old, but it was beautiful and it still fit. My late husband, Peter, used to say it brought out the color in my cheeks. I held my ground. Before I could speak, Pamela noticed me and rushed over. "Grandma," she cried, beaming. "You made it." I hugged her tightly and slipped the corsage onto her wrist. "White orchids, just like you said." Her eyes welled up slightly. "You remembered." "She remembers everything," Betty cut in, smiling with all the warmth of a blade. "Especially how to insert herself into events that really aren't about her." Pamela's smile faltered, but she looked down at her wrist and said nothing. The rest of the evening went by in pieces. I tried to find a corner to stay in, so as not to embarrass the family, as Betty once put it at a Christmas brunch when I asked about joining them for vacation. But still, she kept finding me. Nibbling comments, snide remarks, comments to other parents that I was technically the grandmother, but really just the other woman Peter used to complain about. When she made that last comment near the refreshment table, I nearly dropped the cup I was holding. She was smiling when she said it, as if it were a joke. No one laughed. It wasn't until the principal announced that all family members were invited onto the dance floor for a slow number that things came to a boil. Pamela reached for my hand, pulling me toward the floor, but Betty blocked my path. "Let's not," she said, her voice louder than it needed to be. "This night is for family." "I am family," I said. "I always have been." Betty tilted her head, a cruel gleam in her eye. "You really believe that, don't you?" By now, people were watching. Even the DJ hesitated to press play. Parents turned their heads. My son, Greg, Betty's husband, stood awkwardly by the bleachers, hands in his pockets, avoiding my gaze like always. The tension twisted and curled like smoke through the air. And then she said it. Loudly, clearly, in front of every student, every teacher, every parent standing in that gym. Maybe you'd be family if you hadn't failed as a mother, a wife, and a grandmother. The words hit like a slap. Time seemed to pause. Someone gasped. A boy near the snack table muttered, "Whoa." And then she pushed me. It wasn't a violent shove, but it was enough to make me stumble backward. I caught my heel on the corner of a folding chair and fell hard. My dress tore along the side as I hit the floor, the sound of fabric ripping drowned out only by my own startled breath. No one helped me up. Not Greg. Not Betty. Not even Pamela, who stood frozen, her hands over her mouth. I sat there for a moment, dazed and humiliated, the cold gym floor beneath me and a sea of shocked faces staring down. Then I stood, straightened my back, fixed my scarf. I looked directly at Betty, whose smile was starting to falter. And I said 5 words, slowly, calmly, words that made the color drain from her face. I know what you did. She blinked. I didn't elaborate, I didn't need to. She knew, and now she knew I knew. I turned to Pamela and touched her wrist gently. You looked beautiful tonight, sweetheart. Then I walked out. No one followed me. I sat in my car in the dark parking lot, the rip in my dress fluttering against my knee. The shame was still there, thick in my throat, but something else was starting to rise too. Something that had lain dormant for years. I had let Betty humiliate me too many times. I had let Greg become a stranger. I had let myself be pushed aside, literally and figuratively. But no more, it was time to act. And I had more power than she thought. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the silence in the car was heavier than the air had been in that gymnasium. I left the headlights on for a moment longer than necessary, staring through the windshield at the familiar outlines of the garden Peter and I planted 35 years ago. The lavender bushes were dry, and the porch light flickered like it always did, but it was still my home. My space. My sanctuary, even if it had started to feel more like a holding place for memories than a haven for the living. I killed the engine, stepped out into the night, and let the door close behind me with a soft click. The sound had always comforted me. Tonight, it only confirmed that I was alone again. Inside, I made myself tea black, no sugar, like Aunt Jess used to drink it. I hadn't thought about her in months, maybe years. Not properly. But as I stood in my kitchen, staring at the reflection of my torn dress in the glass of the microwave door, she came back to me in waves. Jess was my mother's younger sister, fierce, unmarried by choice, and always a little unpredictable. She owned a house near the coast, wore linen year-round, and never asked permission for anything. My parents considered her a cautionary tale. I thought she was magic. She passed away 13 years ago, and though she had no children of her own, she left everything to me: her house, her art collection, a few small investments. Most of it I'd sold off quietly, not out of necessity, but because at the time, I had Greg and Peter and a home of my own. I didn't want questions or judgment. I didn't want Betty asking what the proceeds were worth, or Greg eyeing the money like it was his by blood right. I never deposited the money into our joint accounts. Instead, I placed it into a private account in my name, one that Aunt Jess's lawyer helped me set up. It had sat there quietly for years, gathering interest untouched. I never used it. Not once. Not when Peter was in the hospital and the insurance lapsed for 3 months. Not when I had to quietly sell my engagement ring to pay for Pamela's braces because Greg claimed they were too expensive right now. Not even when Betty started making those snide comments in front of dinner guests, suggesting I didn't understand how much college costs these days whenever I asked about helping Pamela with her applications. I had money. I always had money. But somehow I'd let them see me as poor. I'd let Betty build this image of me as the quiet, grateful widow who should be thankful for a plastic casserole dish at Christmas and a seat near the children's table. I had let it happen. And I didn't even know why. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe fear of being resented. Or maybe I'd spent so long giving that I'd forgotten how to protect what was mine. The teapot whistled, sharp and shrill, breaking my thoughts. As I poured the water, my phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Pamela. "Grandma, are you okay?" My chest tightened. I stared at the screen, then called her. She picked up on the first ring. "Hi," she said softly. Her voice was quieter than usual. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm sorry about tonight. I didn't mean to cause a scene." "You didn't," she whispered. She did. There was a long silence. "I don't know why she treats you like that," she finally said. "She acts like you're some burden. Like we're always doing you a favor just by letting you come to family things." My throat tightened, but I forced myself to speak. "Pamela, has she ever said that to you? That I'm dependent?" Pamela hesitated. "Not to me, but to others, yeah. She told Aunt May once that you live off my dad's help." that you can't be left alone for too long or you get weird. She made it sound like you're always calling for money or something. I let out a shaky breath, steadying myself against the counter. That's not true. I know, she said quickly. I've never believed her. I don't understand why Dad doesn't say anything. Because it's easier not to, I said quietly. Pamela sighed. I'm sorry I froze up tonight. I didn't know what to do. But when you said those words to her, I've never seen Mom look like that. It was like you hit a switch. I smiled a little. Good. I want to come visit you this weekend. Just us. Is that okay? I'd like that very much. We said goodnight, and after hanging up, I stood for a long time staring at the tea cooling in my cup. Then I climbed the stairs. I hadn't been up to the attic in over a year. It was dusty, full of boxes that smelled of old linen and forgotten holidays. I reached for the one marked Jess, legal and Anth, letters, and carried it down to the living room. I opened it on the rug, slowly, like I was exhuming something sacred. Inside were old letters, a velvet pouch containing an antique brooch I never wore, and several folders. One of them held the original will and the banking documents. I checked the most recent balance online. It had grown. Substantially. Enough to fund Pamela's entire college education and more. Enough to buy myself a new home, should I ever wish to leave this one. Enough to remind Betty and Greg exactly who I was. Enough to stop apologizing for my existence. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. I sat at the dining table, reviewing old paperwork, drinking cold tea, and feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. By morning, I was ready. Greg came by every Thursday to check on me, though we both knew it was more about his sense of duty than any genuine affection. Betty always stayed home, claiming she had errands or a headache. I never pressed her. But this Thursday, she'd regret staying away. Greg walked in around 10 with a coffee in hand and a plastic bag of muffins from the discount bakery. He greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You doing okay, Mom?" he asked. I gestured for him to sit. He did, with the practiced weariness of a man who believed his time was more important than mine. "I want to talk to you about something," I said, keeping my voice even. He glanced up. "Is this about prom night?" Look, I know Betty kind of lost her temper, but no, I interrupted. This is about me. About the truth I've been keeping from both of you. Greg's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he said nothing. I reached into the file beside me and handed him a printout. What's this? My private account. Inherited from Aunt Jess. It's been there for 13 years. He stared at the numbers, blinking. Is this real? Yes. You never told me. No, I didn't. And I'm not sorry for that. Why no? Because I let you, both of you, believe I needed you. That I had nothing. That I was weak. I let her talk down to me in front of your friends. I let her erase me from family photos. I let her treat me like a charity case. Greg looked stunned. Not ashamed, not exactly, but stunned. Like someone realizing their assumptions had cost them more than they thought. I'm not going to let that happen anymore, I continued. I won't be humiliated. And I won't be quiet. He tried to speak, but I raised my hand. You don't need to explain anything. Just listen. From now on, I will be respected in my own family. Or I won't be in it. Another silence stretched between us. Finally, he nodded once, and I saw something shift behind his eyes. Not full understanding, maybe, but the beginning of it. I stood up. I'll expect you and Pamela for lunch on Sunday, I said. Betty, too, if she can manage it. I'd like to tell you both what else Aunt Jess left behind. I didn't wait for a reply. Because for once, I didn't need permission. I woke up before the sun. Not from restlessness, not from worry, but from a sense of purpose that felt unfamiliar. It had been years since I'd felt like this. Years since I'd woken with a list in my mind and the energy to pursue it. I didn't even bother with breakfast. I padded down the hallway in my robe, turned on the living room lamp, and pulled William's business card from the small drawer I kept under the phone. It was worn at the edges, the ink slightly faded. He had been Peter's financial advisor for over 2 decades and continued managing Aunt Jess's portfolio after she passed. Honest, discreet, professional. I dialed. He answered on the second ring, sounding more alert than I'd expected for someone who usually took meetings at noon and considered 10 a.m. early. Lily Henderson, I said. I need you to prepare some documents. There was a pause on his end. Of course. Everything all right? It will be. I want a full report, accounts, assets, titles. Everything Aunt Jess left, everything I've invested since. I want it clean, simple, and ready for presentation. Understood. Are we talking about disclosure? Yes, I said, my voice steady. It's time. He didn't ask why. He never did. I'll have something ready by Friday. Would you like it printed or digital? Printed, I said. I want them to hold it in their hands. Around 11, I decided to take a drive, just to breathe. There was a coffee shop near my old neighborhood, the one Peter and I had lived in when we first married. Something about returning to familiar streets helped me think. I hadn't been back in over a year, not since the holidays when Greg and Betty hosted a half-hearted brunch and served store-bought quiche with champagne like it was some kind of luxury. I parked a little down the street and walked toward the house, our old house, just to look. But then I saw her, Betty, standing at the front steps with a man in a gray polo shirt and a belt full of tools. He was crouched near the doorframe, fiddling with the lock. I stayed behind the hedges, hidden but close enough to hear. Make sure she won't be able to use the old key, she was saying. She's been told not to come around, but I wouldn't put it past her to invite herself in again. The man nodded, working in silence. I want every lock changed front, back, even the garage. Oh, and if you can install a smart camera near the porch, that would be great. We'll need to monitor who comes and goes. He didn't ask questions. Neither did I, because I was too stunned. Our house, the one Peter and I built with our own hands, brick by brick. The one with the cherry tree we planted the year Greg was born. The house I had poured my life into. She was changing the locks like I was a trespasser. I backed away slowly and returned to my car. My hands were shaking when I turned the ignition. Not from sadness, though there was plenty of that, but from something colder. Something older. Betrayal. The phone rang as I drove. My son Nico's name appeared on the screen. Nico, my younger son. The one who had always been the gentler one, the quieter soul. The one who used to send me voice messages on my birthday instead of just a text. I pulled into a side street and answered. Mom, he said, sounding uncomfortable already. Do you have a minute? Of course. There was a beat of silence. I just got off the phone with Greg. I didn't respond. I let the silence sit between us. He told me you've been a bit emotional lately. That you've said some things about Betty that were unfair. And that Pamela's upset. I see. Nico hesitated again. I just think maybe we all need a little space right now. Maybe a break would help cool things off. No visits. No surprise appearances at events. A break. From me. From the woman who had raised him, bathed him, stayed up with him during every fever, clipped his toenails until he was 10 and pretended not to notice when he started pulling away in adolescence. Is that what you want? I asked. He didn't answer right away. I think it's for the best for now. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. All right. If space is what you need, I'll give it to you. He sounded relieved. Thanks, Mom. Just take care of yourself, okay? I hung up without another word. And for the second time that day, I felt something inside me harden. She was winning. Not because she was right, but because she was faster, louder, more shameless. She had already started spinning the story, painting me as the unstable, dramatic mother-in-law who showed up uninvited and caused scenes. The woman who needed to be kept at a distance for the sake of peace. The woman who didn't know when to let go. And my sons, were too comfortable to question her. By afternoon, I found myself parked outside a modest two-story home with a crooked mailbox and a fading Welcome Spring flag still hanging from the porch. Pauline's house. She'd been my closest friend since high school. Wild where I was cautious. Blunt where I was quiet. Pauline didn't do subtlety. She once told her daughter-in-law to her face that if she didn't like Sunday dinners, she could learn to cook herself. They hadn't spoken for 3 months. Pauline never lost sleep over it. She opened the door before I could knock. You look like someone just told you your eulogy was already written, she said, ushering me inside. I sank into her kitchen chair, the one with the worn cushion that smelled faintly of cinnamon and fabric softener. I made tea, she said, already placing a cup in front of me. But if you want gin instead, just say the word. I told her everything about prom night, the push, the 5 words, the account, the locks, Nico's phone call. Pauline didn't interrupt. She didn't blink. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her hands folded across her chest. You've got them scared, she said. I looked up. What? Betty's not changing locks because she thinks you're irrelevant. She's doing it because she knows you're not. She's seen the look on your face. She knows something's changed. You've stopped playing her game. That's why she's trying to cut you off before anyone else notices. I stared at my tea. You've been hiding your power for too long, Lily, Pauline said gently. You're not some sad little widow with nothing. You have assets. You have information. And you have the one thing she doesn't. What's that? Time, she said. Betty's playing defense. But you? You've just started writing your first move. That evening, I returned home with Pauline's words echoing in my mind. I placed William's card back in its drawer and pulled out another folder, one I hadn't opened in years. Inside was a letter. Peter's handwriting. A note he'd written a few months before he died, tucked into our safe. I hadn't read it in a long time, but tonight I needed his voice. Lily, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And if I know you, you've been quiet too long. I hope you remember who you are when things get loud. I always knew you were the strong one. Strong enough to let people think otherwise. I read it twice. Then I picked up the phone. It was time to write my version of the story. The morning air felt crisp, unseasonably so for late spring. I stood by the window of my study, watching the light spill across the front lawn as if it were trying to warm something deeper than just grass and pavement. I hadn't slept much. The thoughts kept circling, what Betty had done, what she was still doing, and how many people were willing to follow her lead just because it was easier than questioning the truth. But last night, after reading Peter's letter again, I knew what I had to do. It wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. It was about restoring dignity, not just mine, but Pamela's too. My granddaughter deserved to grow up knowing that her family didn't start and end with manipulation and control. And Betty was not going to rewrite my story anymore. By noon, I was sitting in front of my laptop with a notepad in hand. I hadn't done this sort of thing in years, not since I used to help Peter manage some of his contracts before he retired, but it came back quickly. Public records, archived social profiles, college alumni databases. It didn't take long. Betty's resume, which she once proudly recited during a Thanksgiving toast, claimed a degree in finance from Berkeley and an executive-level role at a marketing firm before she took time off to raise Pamela. She said it like a noble sacrifice. Back then, I clapped with everyone else. But according to the Berkeley alumni site, there was no record of a Betty M. Henderson or a Betty Miller, her maiden name. I searched under every variation I could think of. Nothing the marketing firm she'd boasted about? It existed. But when I called posing as someone verifying credentials, they politely informed me that no one by that name had ever worked there. And then, in a dusty old court record database, I found the rest. Her previous marriage, filed in a rural county across the state line. Brief, messy, allegations of verbal abuse, financial misconduct. She'd left after 18 months, changed cities, changed her last name, and reinvented herself before Greg ever met her. She had built her entire identity on half-truths, and now she was gatekeeping mine. Later that afternoon, I met William at his office. His building was sleek and understated, with the kind of soft carpeting that muted every step and a glass door that caught your reflection just enough to remind you who you were. He greeted me with his usual calm. "I've got everything ready," he said, gesturing to a polished folder on the desk. Asset summary, trust details, property history, even a preliminary plan based on the conversation we had. I sat down slowly, my hands folded neatly in my lap. "I want to create something," I said. "Something that lasts beyond me, but also something that speaks now. Something that says, I was here and I wasn't a fool." William nodded. "You mentioned your granddaughter. Pamela, right?" "Yes." She's bright. She's thoughtful. But she's been raised in a house where her mother measures worth by wealth and image. I want Pamela to know there's another way to live. A better one. I want her to feel empowered by her family, not embarrassed by it. He flipped open the folder and turned it toward me. Then I suggest we start here. The page showed a breakdown, a discretionary trust for Pamela, tied to her education and future housing. Oversight by me, structured so that Betty and Greg couldn't touch a cent. I felt something shift in my chest, pride, maybe, or relief. And I want to move, I added. Somewhere new. Not because I need to, because I can. William raised an eyebrow. Any place in mind? I didn't hesitate. Harbor Ridge. He blinked. That's a very exclusive area. I know. Betty had once waxed poetic about Harbor Ridge over dinner, her voice soft and dreamy. Oh, the houses there, she'd said. If I ever win the lottery, that's where I'd go. Mediterranean roofs. Walk-in wine cellars. That's real living. I remembered how Greg had chuckled and said, "Keep dreaming, babe. That's way out of our league." At the time, I said nothing, just quietly passed the potatoes. Now I smiled. I'll meet a realtor. William gave a slow, amused smile. I'll have someone from the property division reach out. And once I'm settled, I said, reaching for the folder, we'll make the trust public. In my will. At a dinner, perhaps. When everyone's gathered and can see it for themselves. Subtle. No, I corrected gently. Clear. That evening, I stood in my current kitchen, our old kitchen, Peter's and mine. The tile under my feet had cracks now. The drawers stuck when you opened them. The pantry still held some of his favorite tea, stale now, but untouched. I opened the cupboard above the stove and pulled out a photo. It was a print of Peter and me at Harbor Ridge years ago, back when the development first opened and we used to walk through the model homes just for fun. He had his arm around me in the photo. I was laughing, my hand shading my eyes from the sun. I remembered that day. He'd whispered, "One day, Lily, we'll live like queens and kings." We never did, but I would. And not for marble floors or wine cellars. For dignity, for truth. For Pamela, for myself, I held the photo for a long time before returning it to the cupboard. I wouldn't need it where I was going. I've heard people say that money changes everything. I used to think they were exaggerating, people who'd never lived through real grief, or the slow erosion of dignity in a house where your value was measured by how little you cost everyone else. But as I stood outside Greg's office that Thursday afternoon, I realized money didn't change everything. It simply revealed everything. And Greg was about to see clearly, for the first time in his life, exactly who I was. But before that confrontation, there was something more important I had to do. Earlier that morning, I met with William in his office once more. We sat at the long oak conference table, sunlight slanting through the blinds behind him. His pen clicked rhythmically as he reviewed the paperwork I'd asked him to draft. No formal announcement, he asked. No, I said. She's already under enough pressure at home. You're sure you want it anonymous? I'm sure. Pamela had worked so hard to get into her dream university, late nights studying while Betty scrolled through social media, dismissing every extracurricular or scholarship form with a wave of her manicured hand. Apply for loans like everyone else, she'd said. You'll appreciate it more if you pay for it yourself. No. I wouldn't let her graduate with $120,000 in debt just so her mother could teach her a lesson in suffering. I want the tuition paid directly, I told William. All for years, housing, books, fees. Everything. Through the school's financial services department. I don't want them even knowing where it came from. And if they ask? I smiled faintly. Let them assume it's a scholarship. A blessing. A gift from life. Whatever helps them sleep at night. He nodded. It'll be done. As I signed the final page, I felt lighter. Not because of the money spent, but because I knew what it meant. Pamela would have freedom. Real freedom. Not just from financial debt, but from the constant guilt and control that her parents used to bind her to their image of success. And she'd never know it came from me. That was the point. She didn't need to owe me. She just needed to be free. 2 hours later, I was in Greg's office lobby. The receptionist, a young woman with efficient eyes and too much mascara, offered a polite smile. Can I help you? Yes. Tell Mr. Henderson his mother is here. Her brows lifted slightly. Your name? Lily, I said. He'll know. Moments later, I was ushered down a sleek hallway, past glass-walled meeting rooms and rows of desks where people in headsets pretended not to stare at the woman in the tailored navy coat and silver brooch. Greg's office was large, cornered, full of cold light and expensive furniture that didn't look like it got used much. He stood as I walked in. Mom, he said, smiling too quickly. I wasn't expecting, I know, I said, closing the door behind me. Sit down. His smile faltered. Is everything okay? I sat across from him, laying a leather folder on the desk. I'm not here to argue, or to talk about Betty. I'm here to tell you the truth. He glanced at the folder but didn't reach for it. I've been quiet for years, I continued. You and your wife have treated me like I was fragile, slow, irrelevant. And I let you. I let you think I needed your help. I let you treat me like an obligation. I let Betty insult me to my face while you said nothing. I let you both believe I was lucky to be tolerated at your table. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That's not Mom. We've never said, but you've lived it, I said calmly. You've lived it, Greg. And now I want you to understand something very simple. I opened the folder. Inside were printed statements, estate summaries, and asset sheets. William had labeled each page clearly, with the final page listing my total net worth, $12,842,000 and change. Greg stared, then blinked, then read the figure again. I don't understand, he murmured. It's all mine, I said. It was Aunt Jess's and Peter's and mine. Real estate, art, investments. I've managed it carefully. It's grown. And I haven't spent a dime of it on you. Not since Pamela was 10. He looked up slowly, as if his brain was still catching up. All these years, yes, I said. All these years. He swallowed hard, his mouth opening slightly, like he was about to speak, then closing again. I paid for Pamela's university this morning, I added. She'll never know it was me. He exhaled slowly. Betty, she always said you were barely making it, that you were lucky we let you stay involved. I tilted my head. And you believed her. He rubbed his jaw, looked away. It just seemed easier. Not questioning things. Yes, I said. Easier for you. He looked down at the folder again, then back at me. Why now? He asked. I leaned forward slightly. Because I'm giving you a choice, Greg. Right now. Before this goes any further. His brow furrowed. What kind of choice? I held his gaze. You can decide what kind of man you want to be. What kind of son? You can keep standing behind your wife's skirt, letting her dictate what respect I do or don't deserve. Or you can grow up. You can choose to see me clearly, to speak up, to be decent. Not for inheritance, not for money, but because it's the right thing to do. The room went quiet. The city skyline gleamed faintly behind him, far more honest than anything inside that office. You think this is about money, I said. But it's not. It's about what you've let her convince you of. That I'm a problem. That I'm disposable. That kindness costs too much. Greg's throat bobbed. And I'm telling you now, I said, standing, you have a chance. To be better. To stop her. Or at least stop you. He nodded slowly. I don't know what to say. I gave him a sad smile. Then say nothing. But think hard, Greg. Because the next time I walk out of this office, I may not come back. I turned, left the folder on the desk, and walked out. That night, I stood in my empty living room, sipping tea from the porcelain cup Peter bought me in Prague on our 10th anniversary. I looked around the room, at the faded curtains, the chipped molding, the antique lamp with the crooked shade. Soon, I'd be leaving it behind. Not because I had to, but because it no longer felt like home. Tomorrow, I would tour the house in Harbor Ridge. The one with the rose garden Betty once said was just pretentious enough to be perfect. The one with the wide staircase and tall ceilings and the wraparound porch that faced the sun. And I would buy it. In full. With no mortgage. No cosigners. No Betty.it began with a phone call. Then 2. Then 5. All from Betty. The first came on a quiet Monday morning, just 3 days after I visited Greg's office. I just signed the final paperwork for the Harbor Ridge house, and the keys sat in a small envelope on the entryway table. I hadn't told anyone except William. Not Greg. Not even Pamela. Certainly not Betty. Her name flashed on my screen just as I was finishing a cup of tea, the one I brewed with a cinnamon stick like Peter used to. I let the call go to voicemail. No message. The second time, she tried twice in a row. Then a third time that evening. By Wednesday, she was texting. Messages that started short and polite, "Hi Lily, can we talk?" and turned vaguely insistent. "I think we should clear the air. Greg told me you were upset. Can we meet, just us? I'll come to you." I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, but because I wanted her to sit with the silence. I wanted her to feel, even briefly, what I'd felt every time she looked through me at family dinners, every time she recounted the cost of a birthday gift with a sigh or suggested in front of others that I was getting forgetful. She needed to know that I was no longer reachable on her terms. So I waited. And she didn't. That Friday, just after 2 o'clock, I heard the sound of tires crunching against the gravel outside my new home. I was in the sunroom, my sunroom, placing a bowl of lemons into the wide glass fruit dish that had once belonged to Aunt Jess. The knock came a minute later. Sharp, precise, familiar. I opened the door and there she stood. Betty, in heels and lipstick at 2 in the afternoon, holding a handbag that cost more than the coffee table in my old house. She paused when she saw me. "This is your place?" I stepped back, letting the door swing open. "It is." She blinked, then stepped inside cautiously. Her eyes darted across the marble floors, the grand staircase, the pale light flooding the kitchen through tall windows. Her shoes tapped softly across the tile, and I noticed for the first time she looked slightly off balance. "You've been ignoring me," she said, after a beat. "I've been thinking," I said calmly, closing the door behind her. "There's a difference." She tried to laugh. It came out thin. "I just thought we should talk." Greg said, "This isn't about Greg," I cut in. "This is about you and me." We stood in the entryway, facing each other like strangers meeting for the first time. "I don't know what you think is going on," she began, "but if this is about prom night, it was a misunderstanding." Tensions were high. Pamela was emotional. "Betty," I said, voice quiet but steady, "don't do that. Not here. Not now." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I know about the locks," I continued. "I know you changed them the day after the dance. I know you've been telling the family that I'm unstable, that I need supervision, that I'm financially dependent, that I embarrass Pamela." Her eyes widened slightly, the first real flicker of uncertainty I'd seen in her in years. "You've humiliated me in public. You've mocked me in private. You've made it your mission to control how I'm perceived in this family. And you've done it so smoothly, so consistently, that even my own son started to believe it." Betty stepped back slightly, her voice quiet now. "I didn't think you cared that much about what I said." "No," I said. "You thought I wouldn't fight back." She exhaled slowly, setting her bag on the side table as though needing to relieve herself of the weight. "I didn't expect this," she muttered, looking around again. "All this time. I thought you were just what?" I challenged. "Some harmless old woman with no real choices left?" She didn't answer. "What do you want?" she asked, finally. "Is this about revenge? Are you trying to prove something?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "What I want is simple." I took a step forward, not aggressive, just clear. I want respect. I want to be treated like I matter. I want to be spoken to like a human being in my own family. I want to be invited to events without being made to feel like a charity case or an afterthought. She looked away for a moment. "And I want a place, Betty. A real place. At the table. At the celebrations. In Pamela's life. In my son's lives. Not because I make myself small enough to be tolerated, but because I belong there." The room went quiet. Betty's jaw clenched. I could see her brain working behind her eyes, flipping through every weapon she'd used before: sarcasm, charm, condescension. None of them fit now. So she said finally, her voice lower, more tired than I'd ever heard it. "What now?" "That depends on you," I said. "I'm not asking for affection. I'm not asking to be liked. But if you want to stay part of this family, and yes, I said you, Then you will start treating me with the same respect you expect for yourself." She flinched. "I won't sit silently at dinner while you make jokes at my expense. I won't listen to you describe me as a burden in front of strangers. I won't be edited out of birthday photos or asked to watch from home. I'm done playing along. And if I don't," she asked quietly, "then I'll stop pretending you're family at all." A long silence followed. For the first time in years, Betty didn't have the last word. She picked up her bag slowly, adjusted the strap on her shoulder, and walked to the door. Just before she stepped out, she turned and looked back at me. "You could have said something a long time ago," she said. "I did," I replied. "You just weren't listening." Then I closed the door behind her. That night, I lit a candle in the sunroom and opened the letter Peter had written to me again. I read it slowly, taking in each word like it was a map out of some long, dark tunnel I'd forgotten I was in. I looked around my new home, quiet, elegant, mine, and I felt no guilt, only resolve. I hadn't humiliated Betty. I'd simply stopped letting her do it to me. There's a strange quiet that follows a confrontation, not silence, exactly, but a space that opens up after the words have landed and the masks have dropped. I felt that quiet the morning after Betty stood in my foyer, holding her purse like a shield and blinking like someone seeing me clearly for the first time. I spent that morning watching the wind move through the trees in my new backyard. The lawn sloped gently toward a stone path lined with rosemary shrubs, the kind Peter always wanted, but we never had the time or the money for. It was the first time in a long while I could sit in my own home and not feel like an imposter in someone else's story. And I knew, without a hint of doubt, that Betty would never look at me the same way again. Not as invisible. Not as harmless. Not as someone she could control. Greg called me just before lunch. I recognized the tone before he said a single word. Careful. Uneasy. Like someone walking across a floor they suspect might crack beneath them. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Do you have a minute?" "I do." He paused, and I could hear him shifting, maybe at his desk, maybe pacing. I pictured him in that pristine office with its impersonal furniture and expensive silence. My son who used to cry when he lost a toy car at the grocery store, who once saved his allowance to buy me a book of poems on Mother's Day, now sounding like a man cornered by his own life. "Betty told me she came by," he said. "She did. She said you were different, that you've changed." I let out a quiet breath. "No, Greg, I haven't changed. I've just stopped pretending." He was silent. Then, "She said you were angry." "I am angry," I said simply, "but not in the way she thinks. I'm angry that I let it go on for so long, that I allowed the people I love most to believe I was someone who needed permission just to exist in their lives." "I didn't know," he said, and there was a kind of weariness in his voice that made my heart ache, even through the hurt. "I didn't know you were sitting on that kind of money. That you had all that. I know. Why wouldn't you tell us?" I leaned back in my chair, the sunlight warm on my shoulder. "Because I didn't want the money to be the only reason people kept me close," I said. "I didn't want it to become a transaction. I thought if I just stayed quiet and generous and small, people would love me because I deserved to be loved." He didn't speak. "I thought if I didn't ask for much, I'd be safe from disappointment. That I wouldn't stir the pot. That Betty would treat me better if she didn't feel threatened." Another long pause. And what changed? I looked around the sunroom, at the antique bookshelves I'd finally unpacked, at the polished wood floors, at the photo of Pamela and me from the school play I'd framed just that morning. "You did," I said. "All of you. The way you started looking through me instead of at me. The way you let her tell my story without asking if any of it was true. The way you assumed my silence was submission instead of grace." "I never meant to, I know," I said softly. "But that's not the point, Greg. You didn't have to mean it. You just had to watch it happen. And you did." His voice cracked slightly. I didn't realize how much I'd let slip, how far we'd drifted. "It's not too late," I said. "But I'm not going to chase you. I'm not going to explain myself anymore. I've given you everything you needed to see the truth. Now it's your turn to decide." "To decide what?" I let the words hang there. "To decide what kind of son you want to be." He was quiet again. But it wasn't defensive silence. It was thinking silence. Heavy, human, honest. "And if I don't get it right," he asked, I'm not asking for perfect, I said. I'm asking for effort, for clarity, for respect. If you can give me that, you'll always have a place here. In my life. In this family. But I won't beg to belong anymore. He sighed, deep and raw. Pamela, she misses you. I miss her too. That's why I did what I did for her. He hesitated. She doesn't know, does she? No. And I don't want her to. Not unless it comes from you. Greg's voice broke slightly. I don't deserve that kind of trust. Maybe not, I said. But sometimes trust isn't a reward. It's a test. I could hear him swallow on the other end. I need time, he finally said. You've got it, I said. But the door only stays open if you walk through it, Greg. I won't leave it open forever. I understand. We hung up without any dramatic goodbyes. Just silence. And for once, I didn't feel it. I sat there in the stillness, knowing I had given him everything he needed to make his choice. Not as a threat, but as a gift. Later that afternoon, I walked through the garden, trailing my fingers across the rosemary bushes. The wind had picked up. The scent clung to my skin. I thought of Peter. I thought of Aunt Jess. I thought of the girl I once was, too quiet, too careful, always waiting for someone else to say you belong. Not anymore. I had finally learned the power isn't in being accepted. It's in refusing to disappear. 6 months is enough time for a garden to bloom, for new habits to take root, and for a woman to learn what peace really feels like. I had never imagined living in a place like Harbor Ridge, but now I couldn't imagine living anywhere else. The mornings were quiet, the air had a cleanness to it that reminded me of summers long ago, and the sunroom, my favorite corner of the house, looked out over a ridge where the light poured in like honey every afternoon. I filled the space with things that made me feel alive. Bookshelves, real linens, art I didn't have to ask permission to hang, teacups that didn't have chips, a rug from Aunt Jess's house, photos of Pamela, and laughter, so much laughter, whenever she came to visit, which she now did almost every weekend. It was our time. Free of tension, of snide remarks, of the weight of being polite around people who didn't make space for us. She helped me plant lavender along the walkway. We baked her favorite cinnamon cookies. We watched documentaries. I taught her how to make Peter's favorite roast chicken, and she made me playlists of her favorite songs so I could catch up to the century, as she said with a smirk. She was becoming a woman, and I was finally being seen as one again. Greg had been trying in his own way. He called regularly now, not out of guilt, but slowly, it seemed, out of something more genuine. The conversations were still careful, but not stiff. He even came by once, alone, and sat with me in the garden for almost an hour. No Betty, no posturing, just a son trying to make his way back. I appreciated it, but I also understood something he hadn't quite said out loud. She was still a wall between us. One rainy Thursday, I answered his call while watching the storm move over the trees. I don't know what to do anymore, Greg said, not angrily, but with the kind of defeated honesty I rarely heard in his voice. About what? I asked gently. She just can't let it go. Every time I mention you, it turns into something else. Accusations. Deflections. I've tried talking to her. I've asked her to apologize to you, to own what she said, but it's like she physically can't admit she was wrong. I closed my eyes. You can't make someone be accountable, Greg, especially when their whole identity is built around being right. She says you're trying to turn Pamela against her. I nearly laughed. Pamela has her own eyes, her own mind. I don't need to turn her against anyone. She thinks you're influencing her. With your house and your time and everything. Do you believe that? I asked softly. He hesitated. No, not anymore. There it was. Growth, small and real. But he continued, I think Betty's trying to find some other reason to explain why Pamela is pulling away. Instead of just listening to her, I murmured. Exactly. I didn't try to comfort him. That wasn't what he needed. What he needed was to sit with the truth. I had done that too, many times over. She wants to meet with you again, he added, almost reluctantly. I looked out at the rain-soaked trees, my voice quiet. And what would that accomplish? I honestly don't know. She says she wants to. Clear the air. Greg, I said, we're long past fog. We're standing in the wreckage. It's not about clearing the air. It's about what kind of people we want to be in it. He didn't answer right away. I'll keep trying, he said finally. But I wanted to be honest. She's not changing. 2 days later, Pamela and I sat at the kitchen island, sipping cocoa. She had just come back from her first round of midterms and was telling me about her new literature professor, who she said reminded her of me, all soft voice and sharp eyes. She stopped mid-sentence and said, "Grandma, can I tell you something?" "Always." She stirred her cocoa for a second before looking up. "Mom's acting different lately. I mean, more than usual." "How so?" "She keeps asking about your house. What kind of deal you got? Whether it's in your name. What you do with your money." My stomach didn't sink. It didn't have to. I'd been expecting this. I told her it's none of her business, Pamela added quickly. But she won't drop it. I smiled faintly. "I imagine it's difficult for your mother to see me thrive without needing her approval." "She's not asking questions because she's interested," Pamela said. "She's asking because she's nervous. She thinks you're planning something. She even asked if I thought you were going to cut everyone off in the will." I chuckled, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictably sad. "Well, I haven't died yet." Pamela laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. "She only started caring this much after Dad told her how much money you have." And there it was confirmation, not that I needed it. But it's different when your granddaughter says it plainly. When the illusion that maybe, just maybe, this was all a misunderstanding is finally, undeniably dead. "She's not going to stop," Pamela said. "She doesn't even pretend anymore. She just wants to know how to get a piece." I nodded slowly. "I know." She looked at me worried. "Are you okay?" I reached over and took her hand. "I'm more than okay. I'm exactly where I need to be. And I promise you, Pamela, she will never have control over me again. Not through guilt. Not through silence. And certainly not through money." That night, I sat in the sunroom and made a decision. Betty wanted a conversation? Fine, but the next time we spoke, it wouldn't be a truce. It would be terms. It came in the form of a letter. A short one, handwritten, no dramatic preamble, just a folded page tucked into my mailbox one quiet Tuesday morning, in an envelope with no return address, as if she couldn't quite bear to commit even her name to the front. It had been weeks since Pamela told me about her mother's newfound interest in my money. Weeks since Greg had admitted, in his own way, that the woman he married wasn't capable of much reflection. So when I recognized Betty's careful cursive on the note, I stared at it for a long time before opening it. I wasn't afraid of what it would say. I just didn't expect it to come at all. "Lily, if you're willing, I'd like to meet. Just the two of us. No Greg, no Pamela. No expectations. Just coffee. There are things I need to say out loud." Betty, there was no demand. No sugarcoating. No performance. That, more than anything, intrigued me. I waited 2 days before responding. Not out of spite, but because I needed time to decide whether I believed this was real. In the end, I agreed. We met at a small cafe halfway between my new home and the old neighborhood. The kind of place with mismatched furniture and quiet music, where no one asked too many questions and the coffee came in real porcelain mugs. Betty was already seated when I arrived. Her posture was too upright, her hands folded tightly around her cup like she was afraid it might slip from her fingers if she relaxed even a little. She wore a muted gray sweater, no lipstick, and for once, no visible armor. She stood when she saw me, then hesitated. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "I wasn't sure you meant it," I replied. We sat. The silence between us was heavy but not hostile, just years and years of unsaid things straining against a table barely wide enough to hold them. She didn't look at me when she started speaking. "I've been thinking," she said slowly. "A lot. Since everything happened." "Thinking about what?" She hesitated. "About why I treated you the way I did." I sipped my coffee and waited. "I spent years convincing myself you looked down on me," she continued. "That you pitied me. That you were just waiting for me to fail as a wife, as a mother." I tilted my head. "And did I?" "No," she admitted quickly. "You didn't. That's the thing. You never did. You were quiet, kind, gracious. And for some reason, I hated that. Because I thought if you were those things, then I had to compete with them. She looked up then. Her eyes were tired, but not defensive. Not this time. I was afraid, she said. Afraid that if you had a bigger place in Greg's life, I'd lose mine. Afraid that if Pamela looked up to you, she'd see all the things I'm not. And so you humiliated me, I said, not as an accusation, but a fact. She flinched. Yes, I did. I tried to make you small so I'd feel bigger. There was a pause. I don't expect forgiveness, she added. I needed to say it. I've done damage. I know that. She looked down at her hands. And for what it's worth, she said quietly, I'm sorry. No excuses. No buts. Just, I'm sorry. For the first time in years, Betty looked less like the woman who had built herself on performance and more like someone stepping into her own skin, clumsily, painfully, but willingly. I studied her for a moment. Then I said, I accept your apology. Her shoulders fell slightly, as if some long-held tension had been released. But I added, this is where I draw the line. She looked up again. I am not your competition. I am not your project. I am not someone you get to reshape depending on what narrative suits you. If you truly mean what you just said, then you will never again speak to me, or about me, with cruelty, sarcasm, or dismissal. She nodded. I will not tolerate being erased from my own family. I understand, she said quietly. I hope so, I replied, because I'm not asking for closeness. I'm asking for decency. She nodded again. We sat in silence for a long time, sipping our coffee, two women who had spent years dancing around each other, finally sitting still. Before we parted, she stood and said, I want to try. I hope you mean that, I said, because I'm not waiting. I don't expect you to, she replied, but I'd like to try anyway. That evening, I returned to my home and walked through the garden barefoot. The sky was soft with twilight and the air smelled faintly of rosemary. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt clear. She had finally seen me, not as someone to fear, not as someone to conquer, just as a woman, her husband's mother, her daughter's grandmother, a person who had given too much and asked for too little until now. Whatever came next, I was no longer afraid of it, because I had finally reclaimed my voice. And this time, I wasn't going to let it go quiet again.